All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting, Hammersmith and Fulham's first virtual Planning and Development Control Committee. Tonight's meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Rachel Layton and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. If I lose connection at any point and can't chair the meeting, then my Vice Chair, Councillor Matt Uboroy, will be taking over for me. I'd just like to remind all of our participants this evening of a few housekeeping points. So please keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking. When prompted, you may indicate that you wish to speak, but please wait until I call upon you before speaking fully. And I also ask that members keep their questions and comments brief and to the point this evening. If any councillor leaves the meeting or loses connection during an item, we will pause and wait for a few moments to allow them to reconnect. If a councillor is not present for a substantial part of the discussion, then they'll not be able to vote on that item. The quorum for this meeting is 4 members of the committee. If we have fewer than 4 members in attendance, then I will adjourn the meeting. I'll now move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. We have no apologies for absence this evening. All members are present, which brings me on to item 2, which is roll call and declaration of interest. I will now do a roll call to confirm the members in attendance. I will call on members in alphabetical order. When called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. If you don't have any declarations of interest, then please just say present. And just a reminder that your microphones are probably on mute at the moment, so you might want to unmute those while I call on you. So, Councillor Ahern.
Present.
Councillor Harcourt.
Present.
Councillor Carmel.
Present.
Councillor Perez.
Present.
Councillor Siddiq.
Present.
Councillor Thorley.
Present.
And Councillor Uboroy.
Present.
Great. Moving on to item number 3, I'll now call on each member in turn to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting held previously on the 3rd of March. If you agree the minutes, please say agreed. And if not, please say not agreed and explain why you don't agree those minutes. So I'm calling on you again in alphabetical order. So Councillor Ahern.
Agreed.
Councillor Harcourt.
One addition to the minutes, Chair, which is on page 5, item 14, where it just says Old Oak London. It should read Old Oak Road. It's a typo, but it just needs to be corrected. With that change, I'm happy to agree the minutes.
Agreed.
Great. Thank you. Agreed. Councillor Perez.
Agreed.
Councillor Siddiq.
Agreed.
Councillor Thorley.
Well, I'm just noting I wasn't present, but I've got no reason to not approve them.
Great. Councillor Uboroy.
Agreed.
Great. Okay, and moving on to items 4, which is the Kings Mile car park item on Glenthorne Road. If I can ask the presenting officer, Jacques Duplessis, if you could introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I take it everyone can see my screen.
I can see your screen.
Firstly, I would like to draw members' attention to the addendum. There's only one change, which is the change on page 9, is to replace the first recommendation to read similar to the recommendation at section 6.1 of the report, which is page 15. At the end of my presentation, I would read that recommendation. The application is Kingsmill Car Park, also known as Sovereign Court Residential Development. The site is located close to Hammersmith Town Centre, just north of Kingsmill Shopping Centre, and it fronts Glenthorne Road. The proposal is to vary the housing delivery obligations of the Section 106, which is dated 1st July 2013, and the first change is to change the first trigger to allow the occupation of 9 more additional market units, and to change the second delivery obligation trigger to allow 6 more affordable units to be delivered. And then lastly, is to also agree a financial contribution of £135,000. If we look at existing Section 106 obligations, the scheme will deliver a total of 418 units, of which 30% would be affordable. The existing contributions can be seen there, a list which adds up to a total of just under £7 million. If we look at the phasing of development, the first phase can be seen here, which comprise of the A blocks and the B blocks, and phase 2 is the C blocks, D and E block. This is an aerial view looking north. You can see here that phase 1 is almost complete. I appreciate that phase 2 has further developed since this photograph was taken. I'd just like to highlight the site constraints which was discovered during the construction of phase 2. First of all, the developer had to build the basement from a western to an eastern direction, whereas normally it was anticipated that that would happen from a eastern to a western direction. Then following that, the buildings would actually be constructed then from east to west. And there's also a construction access off Glenthorne Road, which has to be in place until July 2021. That has resulted in a delay in delivery of the C blocks until July 2021. If we look at phase 1, phase 1 comprises of 51 affordable units, which would all be completed by September 2020. Blocks C1 and C2 comprise of 40 affordable units, and the first trigger in the Section 106 states that no more than 60% market units to be occupied before 74 affordable units are delivered. This has resulted that there are market units locked up within block B1 and B2 that cannot be occupied until the adequate number of affordable units is delivered. Phase 1, you can see that actually comprise of 196 market units. The applicant is seeking to occupy a further 9 units above the first trigger within these blocks, given the delay of the affordable housing units caused by the issues I explained earlier. The whole development will be completed by November 2021. We look at the approved triggers. There are 3. The first trigger is that not to occupy more than 60% private units before 60% affordable units are delivered. And then that goes through to 80% for the second trigger and 75 for the affordable. And then lastly, the last trigger is no more than 95% of the private units until 100% of the affordable units have been delivered. This has now been requested to change the first trigger, as I mentioned, those 9 units. That takes up the first trigger to no more than 63% market units before the delivery of 74 affordable units. And then we have this improvement on the second trigger, which is 80% market units will deliver 80% affordable units, whereas that previously was 75. So it brings forward 6 affordable units. Office's recommendation is that the committee approves the variation to Schedule 2 of the Section 106 agreement dated 1st July 2013 as set out below. The first is to permit no more than 63% of the market units to be occupied unless and until 60% of the affordable units are practically complete. The second trigger is to permit no more than 80% of the market units to be occupied unless and until 80% of the affordable units are practically complete. And then lastly, the contribution is to include an additional planning obligation in the agreement requiring the developer to pay to the council a financial contribution of £135,000 towards infrastructure, which will only be payable upon the occupation of more than 60% market units prior to the practical completion of 60% affordable units. That brings me to the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Du Plessis. As we have no registered speakers this evening, I wanted to move on straight away to members' comments or questions. Are there any members that would like to identify themselves that have any questions about this item?
Yeah. Councillor Carmel here.
Councillor Carmel, go ahead.
Yes. Well, the first thing dates back to the granting of planning permission at our planning committee meeting back in, I think it was March 2013, where we had an impassioned presentation from one of the Hammersmith Broadway councillors. And one of the upshots of this was that I proposed an amendment that some of the previously given Section 106 monies would be set aside into a feasibility study into the costs of repairing the lovely Victorian or possibly even late Georgian railings in, I think it's Cambridge Grove. Officers agreed to undertake this, and it formed part of the grounds for the decision in favour. But I don't remember ever having received a copy of what the feasibility study actually came up with. And I'd be quite grateful if officers, I'm not sure if any of the officers currently here were there, but certainly I'm sure some members of the committee who were with us there will remember the incident. And I wondered if I could receive a further undertaking from the officers as to... Sorry, didn't mute my phone. Further undertaking from the officers as to what the results of the feasibility study were, or whether they want to apologise profusely for not carrying it out.
Okay, so are there any, I suppose the first question is, are there any officers on the call that can recollect this feasibility study when the initial permission was given in 2013? Can anyone, is anyone present who would remember or had been there during that permission for that meeting?
Hi, Councillor. It's Matt Butler, Head of Development Management at the Council.
Hi, Matt, thank you.
Hi. I may well have been at the Planning Committee. Unfortunately, I don't recall. My memory's not as good as Councillor Carmel. I don't recall that discussion and what agreement was reached. All I can really do is take that away and investigate and update, be it Councillor Carmel or, if the Chair wishes, the Planning Committee separately outside this committee.
Is there, Councillor Carmel, is that something that you would be happy for Mr. Butler to follow up with?
I am sure Mr. Butler is a man of his word, and if he says he will do something, it will be done, and that's good enough for me.
Great. Did you have any other questions on this item?
Just a brief comment.
Go ahead.
This is what I would call a totally vanilla application. I can see, given the circumstances, absolutely no grounds for turning it down, and I will be voting in favour. And unless anybody else has a pressing need to say anything, I'd like to propose a recommendation.
Great. So you'd like to move to the vote. Just before we do, I just wanted to double check. Does anyone else have any comments or questions on this item?
Chair, I have a very brief question, if I'd be allowed.
Councillor, go ahead.
Clearly, affordable units is the essence of the application, and we all welcome that. I just wondered if the planning officer could outline how the financial contribution of £135,000 was arrived at, just so that we can have some background regarding the reassurance that that's an appropriate figure.
Thank you, Councillor. Any contribution would have to stand the test for the Section 106 obligations, which you would know is it has to be necessary, directly related and reasonable. We have looked at the existing infrastructure contributions secured to mitigate against the 294 market units and that sum was 3.6 million. And if you take that against the 294 market units, we have agreed on a sum of 15,000 per unit.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the background.
Okay, any other members with comments or questions on this application? Okay, in which case then I'll move on to voting. So I will be asking if each of the recommendations in the report are agreed, then call on each member in turn to give their vote. Please respond with either for or against or not voting. So,
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you just remind members to pay attention to? Yes.
Yeah, don't worry. So recommendation 1 is outlined in the addendum. So if you can draw your attention to recommendation 1, which is in the addendum. So it would have been on page 5 and it should read that Schedule 2 brackets discount market sale housing of the Section 106 agreement dated, oh lovely, you can see it on your screens now, 1st of July 2013 shall be amended as set out below. And then it's A, to permit no more than 63% of the market units to be occupied unless and until 60% of the affordable units are practically complete. B, permit no more than 80% of the market units to be occupied unless and until 80% of the affordable units are practically complete. And C, to include an additional planning obligation in the agreement requiring the developer to pay the council a financial contribution of £135,000 towards infrastructure, which will only be payable upon the occupation of more than 60% market units prior to the practical completion of 60% affordable units. So I'm going to call on you in turn for your vote on that recommendation 1. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
Councillor Uberoy.
For.
And I also vote for the recommendation. So if I can bring your attention to recommendation 2, which reads that the Strategic Director of Economy, after consultation with the Director of Law and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement, and any such changes shall be within their discretion. So I'll be calling on you to give your vote. Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Sadiq.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
Councillor Uberoy.
For.
And I also vote for that recommendation, which means that the committee has approved that application. That is the close of our business. That's the last agenda that we have this evening. I'd like to thank everyone for attending or watching this evening's meeting. The draft minutes of this meeting will be published on our website shortly. These will be formally approved at our next meeting, which will be again online on the 7th of July. If you have any questions or queries concerning the applications in the interim, please contact the case officer in the application report. Thank you very much for your time, and I wish you all a good evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.